Hello and welcome to the Sales Leader series. I'm your host, Freddie, where I'll be gathering B2B SaaS sales leaders from across the world to answer 5 short, topical B2B SaaS sales questions. These questions are going to be the same each week, bar one, giving you insight and different perspectives into how top performers within the industry think, as well as actionable advice you guys can use in your own selling careers. On this week's episode of the Sales Leader series, I'm talking to Zachary Gropper. Zachary has over 20 years of experience in sales and scaling businesses globally. Having developed and shown his skill for B2B sales, Zachary has held pivotal revenue leading roles within companies such as CEB, Gartner, and Challenger, and has a proven track record of generating revenue and executing go-to-market initiatives. Today, Zach is the CEO and founder of Insight Revenue, a research, analytics, training, advisory support, and consulting firm, helping companies reach the next level of growth using his own vast experience from consulting projects with organizations such as Google, Siemens, and SAP, as well as the repeatable practices that you've used in his own experience in sales roles to excel across the board. On the side, he also spent some time mentoring and coaching others as chairman of the Barcelona Chapter of Pavilion. That was a bit of a mouthful, Zach. Really appreciate you coming on the show and chatting.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the intro.
Well, I hope I did you justice. Of all of the things that I think were the places that we could start this conversation, of which there were many that I kind of wanted to dive into, I think we should start with the Pavilion side to your work. And one of the things I found quite interesting looking at your background in sales, and obviously you've got a whole host of experience in doing that. You've also spent a lot of time mentoring and coaching others, especially within those sales generating roles. From those that you've mentored and coached, and in your own experience, what would you say, if there is one thing that most sales and revenue leaders could do today that typically makes an 80-20 difference in their team's performance? If there were such a thing.
Yeah. And so I might cheat and give you 2, but there's one that comes to mind that's like very strategic, let's say, and one that's, I think, a very practical, easy one to take away. And just to give some context to my background. So I spent about almost 20 years building out the professional services practice at CEB, which is now part of Gartner, and is then our part of the business became Challenger, which many people may know in the SaaS world. But the interesting thing is everything that we did and everything I do, I always been proud of myself as I thought I've been a great salesperson, a great leader, a good coach, all these different things. But at the end of the day, like I start with if I look at my peer level data and I look at like thousands of data points on what other people are doing and marry that to my own experience, that's where things really resonate. And so when I answer questions like this, I always go back to the greatest research that I've ever seen, which is in those years at CB and Gartner that we built out that answer some of these fundamental questions. And I think it's more true. Some of the stuff we learned over the last 20 years is more true now than ever before. And so I'll start with the first thing. It's in a simple way of thinking about it as a commercial leader, whether you knew the organization or not, is, you've got to know your customer as well as you know your product, right? And I think we've lost that, certainly in the SaaS world over the last several years, where we have been, you think of the eras of selling, there was like, everybody was just product selling and all the big companies on earth just kind of built these big sales machines to get the word out about their new products and services. And then you start to get really commoditized. And so everybody tried to differentiate by then doing solution selling and trying to, ask tons of questions and build out these solutions that couldn't be commoditized and make really the customer do all the work. And that also, once the customer got so much information in their hands, they started saying, we don't have time to do any of that stuff. And so it's interesting seeing the evolution, especially in SaaS, where we became like the PLG motion took hold. And like now, a lot of what I see is basically old fashioned product selling again, right? It's not, everyone's like, oh, we want an advisor and consultant, but a lot of, especially transactional sales, it's like everyone's gone back to this disco demo, which is really a glorified features and benefits pitch. And I think companies have realized like, whoa, we stopped caring about the customer because we could just do it at scale and make tons of money. And now we got to sit there and think about like, wait a minute, do we really understand not the user of our product in many cases, but like the buying group and the buyers that we're engaging with, like, what are their problems? What are they actually trying to figure out? And how do we really link into that? And what's our differentiation? So we can actually have a better, deeper conversation. So when they have to go now sit down with the CFO and they say, yeah, there's 10 good ideas here. We're only doing three. Like we're going to be in one of those three. Right. So so that fundamentally is a big strategic change. And I think of it sort of as like a outside in versus inside out. Most companies have been built as inside out, right? Like we know ourselves, we love ourselves, we know everything in our bubble. We got to go tell the world about it. Like we got to tear that down and we got to start with where the customer is, their problems, their challenges, the trends that are affecting them, especially the buying group, and then start reorienting ourselves as very curious and knowledgeable and caring about that customer. And there's tons of research that, this kind of this insight selling is what it's called over the last, 10, 15 years is this idea that we're coming in with a deep knowledge on them and not coming in with just a ton of questions to help qualify them or lots of great features and benefits and ROI statements, right? So I think at a huge, big strategic level, like I think companies need to really go back to that. And it's going back to like really caring about the customer, learning about them. And so that's a big chunk of stuff. If I would say the easy answer to the 80/20 question, like all the data shows this too, it's like get your first line managers to coach is their primary job. Their salespeople develop their skills, listen to calls, coach them on opportunities, like, and don't give them any excuse or give them too many tasks. They don't have time for that because that is where they're most valuable. And that is where you will get huge leverage right off the bat.
Why do you think that those managerial roles on, or at least those individuals aren't putting enough time into coaching the team? I mean, where is that disconnect and what's the reason for that?
Yeah, there's two. I think there's two that are more recent. So one of the more recent things. So we're thinking about like why people aren't coaching, why they don't have time. It's I think first line sales managers these days, especially in SaaS businesses, which I think is a lot of your audience for this. It's if you talk to if I and I spend a lot of time talking to first line, it's one of the most rewarding parts of my work. It's actually sitting with especially new managers and saying, you're like, hey, what's going on in your world right now? And what you find is every company is changing the metrics, they're changing their strategy, they're focusing more on profitability, and they have all these different initiatives happening. They're reorganizing, whatever it is. And all of those kind of meet at a head at the first line sales manager. And so they're being asked to like they're getting calls like, what's going on with this deal? What's going on with this forecast? They're getting a million calls from a million people. And then they're being told, oh yeah, but by the way, like go make your people better, go coach them, go get in the field and like make sure that you're actually, closing deals yourself with them. And like, it's like, you look at their calendars, first of all, they don't, a lot of these managers are very new in SaaS, right? Like, it's like, well, we were crushing it. I was easy to sell and we got promoted because there's no other, like where that's where we have to go next. Right. And then suddenly it's like, no one helped me become a manager. No one really taught me about what coaching was and behavioral science behind that. And they thought like being a good salesperson means I'm going to be a good manager, which we all know that's not true. And so like, I think there's a huge amount of help that's needed to support those managers and all managers to figure out like, how do I wall myself off and prioritize and package my calendar in a way that I actually can like block off time that's just about developing my team and helping them on their pipeline versus like taking them to the woodshed with the pipeline and spreadsheet, right? And say like, what's going on? Because then you're not adding any value. You're just basically chasing people down and they're trying to avoid you. And so I think that's really hard. I think being a new manager is hard for the first time, and I think there's very little support that's out there. And so I think it's a skill, and it's also a process thing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm curious to know as well from doing some of the research, and this kind of follows on nicely to the next question that I want to ask you, Zach, is you have been both. I mean, you've been a top salesperson in a team yourself, as well as led on to managerial roles later down the line. Just a quick side question. Um, I'm assuming, was that just kind of feeling in the dark, an iterative process that you had to do yourself in finding what a good manager and coach looks like? Or did you have other resources that people probably should lean on more so, thinking about their own
No,
development?
and yeah, I guess on that specific question, like, yeah, I mean, I think if you think of like, who are your mentors? Was there a great coach? Like actually, and I won't pick names. One of my favorite managers I ever had, who I think was a great mentor in a lot of ways, was like not a coach at all. Like, and so it's I mean, and I think when you become a top echelon salesperson, a lot of what you want is your manager to just leave you alone or like help you innovate and do things or give you access to things. And so unless you find somebody who really like loves coaching and wants to spend time with you, like I never really, I'm thinking back, like I've had a lot of great managers, but nobody really did that in my career. People kind of left me alone to go do my thing. And that's why I think, I ended up in entrepreneurial and management roles quite often. But I would say, yeah, like looking at the difficulty of that transition, I think that was like most people. Like most people were never put through any program to help them become a manager. They just, you hope that your high performing salesperson would somehow be able to teach other people to be great. One of the things that made me different though is I was very self reflective. I think compared to most people, like I just feel really like intellectually curious, really self reflection, always wanted to improve, and like so I started to think about when we did a lot of studying high performance while I was at CV and Gartner and looking at hundreds of thousands in the end of different salespeople. And one of the things that we found is you can't typically replicate what the first 1 or 2% of high performers are doing. And the problem that most sales organizations make is they put these people on a pedestal and they tell everybody like, hey, be like Freddie, right? And then everyone's like, we love Freddie, but Freddie was born that way. Like we could never do what Freddie's doing. And like and a lot of it is like natural gifts and charisma or some other kind of stratospheric superpowers they have. Whereas what you really need to look at is on balance your top 20% and to study like what are those people doing and then what's replicable, right? And I think it really helped me working at corporate executive board at the time in Gartner to start thinking like, yeah, wait a minute, like there's a lot of like I just do stuff differently than a lot of people, and a lot of it works for me, but a lot of what I'm doing isn't going to work for other people. And so I was very mindful as a manager of that. Say like, listen, like I'm good at saying like, hey, like, look, I know like this is what worked for me, but when I look at what you're doing, you've got to unlock like your way of doing this. And so like, I'm never trying to say do what I do. I'm always trying to say, learn how to think about this challenge. I'll teach you from my experience how to think about it a bit the way I do, but then you go and do it your way. And by the way, here's like templates and best practices of what other people on aggregate are doing across the team, and then go spend time with high performers, right? And so that's what I always did too, was I just go spend time with people that inspired me and pick and choose and steal things from them. And I think that's, and probably like a lot of people you've interviewed, I think, that kind of was a mantra I always had about self-improvement. And I didn't put myself ever through like a fancy business school. So when I found CEB as an opportunity, it's like, wow, like this, I can learn from all the best research, all the best practices, and some really smart people. And that to me was like a really good way of learning about like how corporate America works and just be surrounded by an inspiring environment. I think maybe that's a piece of advice is like find a place like that where you see the people around, and you're like, wow, like I could learn a lot from these people. And if you're not open to learning and you think you've got it all nailed, then that might be that might be an issue.
Yeah, a good time to move on if you think you've got it nailed. Um, you've answered that question perfectly there, Zach. I'd initially kind of thought about asking you. I mean, previously, as you mentioned in CEB, you were a top sales person and top sales performer. One of the things I wanted to ask is what made you different, but I guess some things that weren't, you can't replicate that as you just mentioned, right? So super, super helpful advice, especially for those that are building those teams.
I would love
And
to, I'd love to answer that question though, from a, like, I think there's a pretty clear, so for those who don't know, are not familiar with the Gartner and like the work Challenger did and other people are doing like Matt Dixon and Joel Effect and that stuff, like if you actually look at this, the bulk of like what high performers are doing, like I would love to say like, oh, they modeled all that off me. I was there. Like that's totally not true. But I did spend a lot of time with the research teams and with Matt and Brett, and they went on the road with me and they did interviews with me. And I think when I think about what I was doing, they helped me be self-reflective when they showed me the data on high performance to say like, hey, when you look at like this Challenger prototype who's doing teaching and tailoring and taking control for folks who heard about or read about that stuff, like there are some very clear things that make high performers better in B2B sales, especially as sales become more complex or you want to go into like enterprise. And so I looked at myself and I said, yeah, like, am I, are these some of these things that I'm doing or not doing? And I actually tried to model myself and then my teams off of those practices. And I believe the science is it's true, right? Like those kinds of things, like always going in, like, and I think primarily for me, it was about elevating the conversation. It's not like I'm not here to sell you a product. I'm here to deeply understand what you're trying to do and then sell you like a solution that's going to get you there. And I'm going to think very holistically. And that was the thing that let me break through and I think transformed our business was we had all these different productized solutions or productized consulting offers. But what I was trying to do is say, how do I stitch these all together to get the customer all the way across the river? Like not just like sell them something and get a quick buck, but like, how do I solve the problem they have? And so I was always really creative about like, can I take everything we sell and sell it all at once? And so I was able to sell really big deals compared to everybody else early on. And people were like, well, what are you doing? How does it work this way? But as soon as they started to see we could do multi-million dollar deals, it radically transformed our whole business. And lots of other people tried to get on that bandwagon as far as like, oh, wait, a solution and a strategy is way more effective than just trying to pitch a product itself. And so I'd say like number one, like just try to elevate the conversation and understand what they're trying to achieve. And then be like thoughtful about how do we actually help them get there by giving them the services and the products between us and our team in a creative way. And like, yeah, like you make also like a lot more money selling bigger deals. And that's motivational. And so anyone who's interested in that and wants to have a more strategic and rewarding role, like that's how you get there. You be strategic with your customer and don't just try to move high quantity and volume of goods.
Mm. Fantastic. Taking a bit of a turn here and looking over, say, the last 20 years that you've been in these roles, working for CEB, Gartner, then obviously Challenger. This is a question that we ask all of the people that we get on this podcast, and you can be as specific as you would like with this, Zach. What has been the toughest moment in your career? If you had to choose one, how have you dealt with that? And what advice would you give to others possibly going through something similar?
Yeah. You mean at the salesperson level or just at any role?
In any role, I think it's all appropriate.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Do we think of like career moments? Like, and I'll try to be careful how I talk about this because it's kind of what you do in these opportunities. So for me personally, I just am so passionate about like what the joy I get out of a role. Like, obviously a lot of people are in sales for financial reasons and you want, or you're very competitive. But for me, like team building, like one of the reasons I got out into management initially, and I knew I couldn't make nearly as much money probably was because I just love like developing people and building teams and scaling things and like, world domination. Right. And so if I think about like, I became very personally attached to my teams and I think that takes its toll on you as a leader. And there's a lot of debate these days about like, it's not a family, it's a company. And a lot of companies had to just fire a ton of people. And you got to be really like, you got to be numbers driven about that. I think, I've been in two situations, which I'm lucky. I've been in private equity sales, right? So successfully exited twice in my career, which is one of the reasons I could start my business today. But if I look at those moments, they were really difficult times for me because I went into those situations thinking that like I could live and fulfill the vision I had or the vision we had before through this new chapter of the journey. And we all know whether it's VC or whether it's private equity, I think as a leader, you need to be really honest with yourself. Like your vision, like anything that happened before that transaction is out the window, right? They're going to come in and they're going to have they're going to have a plan for you and the team, which may include you, it may not include you, it may not include anyone on your team that you've hired. And that's a really rough career moment, especially if you build something from the ground, like I did with the whole international business for that solutions business and for that challenger business. And so I think, if I look back, like I don't know what I would do necessarily differently, but I think for anyone walking into like, a lot of people go into sales leadership in SaaS because they hope for that exit. So just you got to be honest with yourself. Like, am I willing to just, be ready for a clean slate and just follow, like go in a different direction if need be? Or not? Is that not, in your DNA? And then it's the type of organizations that you're looking to work in, right? And if you want to sign up for a company that's going to have an exit, you better be prepared for that being a scenario that hopefully you end up with versus joining something where you're building something that's really long term and you're attached to the people in the business. So that I think I've had that happen twice where it's been very hard for me personally, and I've seen people fired and myself have been fired in situations where just the game plan changed and, you just gotta, it's work. It's your job. And so that's all I'd say to my former self is probably like, don't take it so personally. And just, if you're walking in, like the third time this happens, like if it does, like I'm going to be, in a much different mind frame than I would have been in the first time. Right.
Yeah. Clean slate coming. Is that one of the reasons that I mean, it wouldn't have been its sole reason, I can imagine, but I'm assuming, did this tie into a period of time where you started Insight Revenue? Did that kind of kickstart that in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the main motivators for me, right? Like with the things I've accomplished, it's like, what's the thing I really want to do that's going to give me joy? And additionally, to hopefully being very financially lucrative, which, for any business, you got to build value for your stakeholders, right? And I think I wanted to, if I build a team and if we have a vision and we're doing something really compelling, like I want to be in control as a CEO of this company. And like we never have to exit necessarily. It's not like that's not the plan, though. Obviously, anything could happen, but I don't want anyone to be able to come around and just take my team away or just radically overnight, just, change things. Right. And like, I think that's the luxury. I think hopefully we all get to that position in our careers where we are in control of the vision and the dream, and we can live it through to the other side. And we could take a team of people and hopefully like scale them and have them do amazing things and like not, and protect them if we want to, or focus on other things. Right. But like that's now it's all in my control, which has been, you're absolutely right. Like that has motivated me quite a bit.
Mm. Having worked with, a bunch of leaders within all sorts of different industries, particularly software, you know, throughout your career and looking at insight revenue in more detail, kind of as an advisory firm and, doing some sort of consultancy work. Are there any common issues businesses are prioritizing, say, over the last 6 months that you say has been highlighted? What are they, and how are you advising others on these issues at Insight Revenue?
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful question as far as like everything is changing right now. And what of these trends are temporary, right? And if you follow the debates on LinkedIn, like hopefully nobody spends too much of their life there. But there's a lot of debates about how to, what are the biggest problems, how to write. And so what we try to go back to the science and objectivity. So one of the first things I did when founding this company was to bring in a co-founder who came from a really research driven background. So I actually hired or built this company with the person who did all of the research behind Gartner sales and marketing practice and all the work behind Challenger. So he's done all those studies, and we plan on continuing that. So what we did this year to answer this question was we created a revenue effectiveness diagnostic that looks at two primary things we were looking at. It's like if you look at the full cycle of the customer buying process through to kind of the whole flywheel, if you want to think about it that way, like what is the challenge companies are having with value delivery with the customer, consistency, effectiveness, performance. And then also one of the things I always found in my last 20 years is a lot of the companies we worked with had terrible alignment problems between sales, marketing, CS, product, right? And so we wanted to look at that. So the internal alignment and then the alignment with the customer and delivery value. And so we've been rolling that out. We've got about 35 companies that have taken that now and the early returns on that. And so we'll come out with some more data, but it's not a huge surprise, but it's an interesting validation that, probably as you'd imagine, where the companies right now are struggling or see prioritization is awareness and interest, right? So front end of the funnel, people are really, really struggling to get new logos, to be relevant and differentiated and to execute that front end of the funnel. Now, if you unpack that, which we're going to do to really find out, like, is it about qualification? Is this really about outbound versus like marketing? Like, I think that's where a lot of companies who are contacting us need a ton of help right now. And so you could argue maybe that's a messaging challenge. Maybe you don't have product market fit. Maybe it's an ICP. You need to change your ICPs. So we're working with different companies along this different, but I think that is somewhere clearly everyone's challenge. And then it kind of, if you look across the buying process, and then it kind of arcs back up post sale to expansion, right? And again, it's like, it's growth, revenue growth is anemic for a lot of companies right now. Budgets are pretty tight. And so you wouldn't be surprised. It's front end of the funnel and then awareness building. And I think the other piece we found out is, and I wouldn't say people are prioritizing this enough yet. It's like all these handover processes between the different people, whether it's the handover between, marketing or SDR and sales, between sales and then CS or account management. Like in like almost every organization, people say like, yeah, like we're terrible at that. But question is it a priority or not? Because I think when someone looks at like, we're having a problem with expansion revenue, like my guess would be that problem isn't like in that one meeting you're having to talk about expansion. The problem in most cases goes back to that handover and not understanding like what are the core metrics, what do they try to do, how do we bring value into those QBRs and into the onboarding process. And so I think over time, I think that's going to be a big focus for folks. The easiest revenue is obviously going to come from your existing customers. The hardest but important revenue for growth is always going to be like, how are we breaking down doors? And I think that's going to be a lot more about positioning and messaging and like really getting your ICPs validated and correct. And so those are the trends we're seeing and where a lot of people are coming to us right now.
Right. With the work that you're doing, I'm curious to know, is it more of an issue that companies aren't necessarily defining those issues as well as they should? Or is it more so how specific they are with those issues, if that makes sense? Is it just the diagnostic of, oh, this is an area we need to focus on? or is it how granular they're going into? I mean, where is the main problem there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, and by the way, like for anyone who's listening, like if you want to personally take this diagnostic just to like hold a mirror up to yourself, your organization, by all means. And if you want your whole organization to do it, like it's a valuable exercise to get perspective from every function, but also from you see very different points of view from the senior leadership versus the field in these roles. And so that, I think that's where, at this stage, it's a quick 12, 15-minute thing you would do, but it's where we're working with organizations is to reflect on this data and say, why are there these disconnects? Let's start really root causing things. I will be honest with you. Like I see a lot of companies, I'm not referring to any of our clients, of course, but I see a lot of companies that are thinking very tactically about some of these issues that you identify, right? It's like, it's really about, I think the important thing is tough conversations and root causing these issues to go and being willing to like fix some fundamental things as businesses need to transform coming out of this interesting economy versus like, hey, can we just, is there a quick fix to some of these issues? And I think that's where, like thoughtful leaders who are actually bringing this kind of data and then like workshopping it with their team, I think they're going to identify early on, like, what are the tough conversations we haven't had that we now surface with some objectivity. And then we can actually go and tackle those versus like kicking this down the road and like promising that like, oh yeah, if I, like a short term quick fix solution is really going to have impact for us, whether it's the end of this year or like for the ambitious, profitable growth we need for next year. So I think that's the answer to the question is like, if you're not willing to root cause, like you probably have a problem. There's not a lot of shortcuts around right now, but if you're willing to start and then actually do the deep work of some of this transformation most companies need to do, like that's where you're going to see, some companies beating the competition, I think, coming out of this year.
Amazing. I think that's really helped, especially interesting thinking about the different roles and different perspectives within those teams of what they think is the biggest problem. What we should be prioritizing. Super helpful. This is going to be the last question, Zach, and this is going to take a kind of a new idea into practice. I'm asking you for a quick tactical tip for the listeners, and I think this goes back to one of the answers that, or at least some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier. In that, how would you go about building a repeatable process for sales teams to get executive sponsors, in particular, engaged in their deals more often? I think you mentioned, the importance of having those executive sponsors, involved earlier on in the deal, earlier in this podcast. Really interested to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's an interesting, like multi-threading is a hot topic because I think if any analysis you look at deals that are done, there's a great company, EBSO, we're partnering with that has a ton of data that shows like multi-threaded deals are, that's like one of the biggest indicators of a deal that's actually going to close. And I think if you're thinking about multi-threading, what we've seen is like the number of buyers that get involved, even a small deal these days. I mean, I think if you look at Gartner's data, as it's gone past 10 stakeholders, and the more stakeholders past three, the likelihood of actually any deal getting done goes precipitously down. So I think having that conversation, if you're the sales leader or a salesperson with your team, to say like, look, there's a team that's buying this. We need a team to sell, right? And I know that sales engineers and like, the subject matter experts are really strapped for like, there's almost like, there's a fight for anyone to come in on those deals. But for senior leaders, particularly in the commercial organization or even the CEO, like there's probably an ask, right? Like if I'm the CEO or if I'm the CRO of an organization or VP, like, the ask is going to be like, hey, do you have a clear business case for why they need to do this? Do you understand their business? Otherwise, I'm not going to show up. Or like you don't know how to do that very well and you need help. And so like, yeah, there's more business people you could bring in. If you're going to bring a senior person from that side of the organization, it's gonna be a lot easier to get a senior person from someone in your organization. So I think there's this, we used to call this kind of a powerful request that shows like, hey, if they're serious and then we're serious, there's a level of commitment that comes with that. And then also just, if you look at all the data, the more people you have, it's teams selling to teams, the likelihood of that deal closing is much higher. And so just what I just said, like go have that conversation with somebody. If they're reluctant, like explain it to them that way. And they show that you've done the work, you've qualified the opportunity. So it's not a waste of anybody's time. And there's a clear reason for that person to be there and what they need to do. And if you look like you've got your shit together, pardon my French, then, I don't know any CEOs or VPs that aren't going to want to show up for that call if they can. So I think that's the checklist you probably want to put in place.
That those were all of the questions that I had for you today. Really appreciate you taking the time. I think I was packed with a lot of insight for all of the listeners, especially new managers and all sorts of salespeople. Going to be really helpful. Before we wrap up, is there any final parting words you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I didn't prepare anything in advance, but my first thought is like, hey, it's tough. It's tough out there, right? Like from the data we're seeing, and it looks like it could be getting better. But like, just if we'd love to help, right? That's why we built this business, passionate about it. And so, to the extent, my door is always open. I love coaching and mentoring people, and so that's obviously a clear message for our business. Like we'd love to be able to support you on this stuff, but like, just get super curious and caring about your customer, and that's going to allow you not to be like, you don't be some scripted robot, right? Like, get out there and care. And if you care, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to have a way better time doing it. You're going to get bullied by your customer a hell of a lot less. And so those would be my parting words, and like, happy selling, everybody. And hey, it's almost Q4 already. My God. So
Yeah, I can't believe it.
yeah, like if you're an individual salesperson, like put a plan together now so that you can be in like full on execution mode, rigorously with your pipeline through the end of the year.
Amazing. For anyone listening that wants more information about Zach, Insight Revenue, and wants to reach out, there's going to be a bunch of links and resources from wherever you're listening or watching this podcast down below. Really appreciate it, Zach. And for all of those listening, we'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thank you.